Good morning and welcome to Primetime at the BU Library. These events are celebrations of the experiences and accomplishments of Bethel faculty, students, and staff. It's a collaborative project between the Friends of the BU Library and faculty development and other offices on campus. And if you enjoy Primetime programming, you can find a lot of the recorded events in the BU Library digital library, and so check there for any that you wish to watch again or any that you missed that you want to watch. And do support the Friends of the Library. They help to make these events possible, and you can get more information about that if you're interested from the research assistant's desk here in the library. Coming up, a preview of coming attractions. On Thursday, November 9th, in this same time slot at 11:15, Phyllis Alsdorf, a retired Bethel journalism professor, and her editorial staff will discuss the publishing of her new book entitled Thanksgiving in the Woods. Today we have Dr. Steve Henkel. Thanks for being here, Steve. He's going to share with us stories from his life, stories that he wants to pass on to his kids, and the spiritual applications of these stories that come from sports. Thanks. Welcome.
Thank you. Let me say, so I don't forget, if you're one of my students from class, there's a clipboard to sign in on at the back table. So if you didn't do that on your way in, then please do that on the way out, because my memory is not one of my strong suits. Upper level students will tell you that. I appreciate the chance to be here very much. I was here a few weeks ago when we celebrated the 300th presentation of Primetime. It was very clear to me that there are people here in the library who put a lot of effort to help us be able to do this, as well as faculty development. So I appreciate the chance being about to be able to share with you, and I don't take that lightly. It's my first opportunity. I'm certainly expecting time to be informal. So if you have a comment or question that you want to ask along the way, please do that. And I hopefully you'll have a chance to share the ideas in some other venue as well. So it's that much more important, I think, that if you have any input for me or suggestions, I would very much welcome those. So what do Holiday on Ice, Masters Golf Tournament, and bowling backward have in common? Well, even if you're not a sports enthusiast, you probably can pick out that each of them involves a piece of sport equipment. There's an object they're trying to propel to their advantage and try to score. But beyond that, any kind of contest I'm involved with, I look for life lessons. Or I look for things that can be instructive, not just for that sport context, but can be applied in some other kind of setting. And yes, even for spiritual growth, one step at a time. So I'm going to be talking about that and the passing of the baton so that in fact can happen. So I'll be sharing several snapshots that I think describe my journey to writing about sports and using the stories in a variety of different ways. First of all, I attended 25 years ago, that'll date me a little bit, Dad the Family Shepherd Conference at our church, Grace Church, Roseville. Dave Simmons was speaking on behalf of the Family Life Conference, then a division of Campus Crusade for Christ. And he shared about a concern he had to pass on values or a legacy to his kids should he not be there. And it struck me, I was impressed both by his foreplanning to be able to do that, and certainly by the effort that he took to be able to do that. And this describes the technology of the day. His idea was to speak into their lives through stories, through audio tapes. So he recorded a whole series of tapes that he could give to his kids should he not be there, that would help answer questions that might come up at several different points in time, well into the future. Snapshot 2. This is what my copy looks like, because it was the original version of Dan Taylor's Letters to My Children. I think this is his 2011 cover. We read this cover to cover with our first son. We've actually got son number 2 and 3 here, which I appreciate greatly. And I'm sorry to say we were not as consistent reading to them. We had a 7-year gap between the first and the second, and then another 2-year gap for the third. But I think before life became more hectic, we were at least more consistent with the first and read this cover to cover. Brad was mesmerized by the stories, by the content that was in there, and really took notice about the issues that Dan Taylor talked about. Obviously, Dan Taylor is a gifted writer, so he captured his audience in ways that I'm not able to. But I think the power of the story goes well beyond the giftedness of the writer. The stories themselves, I think, can really speak into people's lives. Jesus, obviously, valued stories as a way to communicate truth. In this case, truth that had the power to transform lives. He encapsulated those into parables that describe what victorious living looks like for the believer. The parables hit home with his media audience, partly because they were revolutionary ideas, and partly because his followers were stubborn, like you and I. They were stubborn, and they maybe didn't get it right away, or in some cases not at all. But the stories were instructive, nevertheless. Snapshot 3, letters to my own sons. I took a little different tact than Dave Simmons or Dan Taylor. I took a leap of faith that I'd still be around as my kids matured. I'm not trying to say that the other people were being pessimistic, but I never was the most timely person, so I thought, well, I can write the letters after the fact. So what I tried to do was, pull out different events that had occurred in our lives, maybe just, the one son and I, or in some cases it might have been a complete family experience. But I looked for things that I could write about, and the overriding goals were to help, yes, instill biblical truth. But at a very basic level, I wanted each of them to know that unequivocally they were loved and accepted unconditionally, by us, and more importantly, by God. So I look for the significance of particular things, themes, sports, hobbies, family, travel, a variety of different things. In some cases I might have challenged them in a particular way. I look for a godly quality that I had seen exhibited in them, and then I can help to reinforce that through the story. They received 25 letters, ages 13 through 18. What I did was wrap up actually as a present in a folder on their birthday each year, between the ages of 13 and 18. Then at college graduation, they received 5 more letters. One of those spoke to the college years, and then the other 4 letters, I kind of called them universal in the sense that they were backward focused, and they were addressed dear boys instead of just to one of them, because in this case we tended to experience the event in a much more common way. So one letter kind of addressed the same thing for all 3 in that case. Craig, our youngest, was gracious enough to come here. He graduated a couple of years ago in communication, works in our missions office, and he's going to read one example of one of those letters.
Right on. Man, good. Yeah, so my name is Craig. I'm the youngest, so naturally my parents love me the most. I'm the favorite in our family. Glad to be here. So this letter is entitled Count on It, Summer 2007. Craig, you schooled me about one of life's most difficult lessons the first time you refereed soccer at the sports center. I don't think you realized the impact of your attitude on me at the time. What was the lesson? It concerned James' admonition to consider it pure joy whenever you face trials. James 1:2. The idea to consider here doesn't mean you need to leap up and down in ecstasy. Rather, it's an accounting term. It means that you decide to render or count the circumstances as joy. That's what you did when you faced potentially 6 separate but related trials about the schedule that day without complaint. The first trial was the intrusion of one game on your scheduled year-end 8th grade party. You were scheduled to referee games at 1:15 and 3 and had turned down an evening game so you could attend the party. Instead of the evening game, we suggested you accompany Brennan to the sports center to see if you could add the 11:30 game. Instead of a 4:45 game was added to your schedule, which meant that you'd be late to the party. A second trial directly resulted from the first one. Since tournament officials had already added the 4:45 game to your schedule, you were then not assigned one at 11:30. requiring you to wait 2.5 hours before your first game, since you were already at the field because Brennan had to report at 10:45. The third trial made matters worse. Since the head referee of your 4:45 game had an overtime his previous game, the 4:45 game began 15 minutes late, hence you'd get to the party that much later. The remaining trials affected you throughout the day, rather than focusing on a particular scheduling decision. The fourth trial involved refereeing the 3 consecutive games while being hungry. Although you ate right before leaving home, you had a 2.5-hour wait before the first game, and then a very limited time between games thereafter. In addition, you opted not to buy food so you could save the money. Nice. The fifth trial involved battling 90-degree heat while you refereed the 3 consecutive games. Oh, and did I mention that the circumstances surrounding soccer occurred after you got up at 5 a.m. to go fishing with Brad? The sixth trial, not the fishing, but refereeing all afternoon after getting up early. Craig, when I picked you up that day, I expected to hear moaning and groaning about all that had occurred. In contrast, you didn't complain at all. In fact, you talked cordially about the experience. That's the kind of attitude that James had in mind, although his context was suffering for Jesus. The passage goes on to describe the result of having a joyful attitude, that it will add to your maturity and produce an eventual crown of life. That is something you can count on. Love, Dad.
Thank you. Very nice. Fourth snapshot in my journey was writing about or sharing about life lessons as a part of conducting sports camps at the YMCA right here in Shoreview. It was the first summer that they had sport camps. I was brought on board to give leadership to that, particularly the people who were involved in doing the instructing, and I did some of the instructing myself. As a part of the staff development, the director shared about 4 core values that undergirded what they did, not just the sport camps, but really the organization as a whole. Respect, caring, honesty, and responsibility. I took that to mean I had liberty to share about any values. So as long as I didn't mention the Bible as being the source, I was able to bring in all kinds of biblical values as a part of what we did, relate them to our sport experience. And I think in that way, I try to enrich the program. I built in a character counts time to any given day. This is just looking at what one schedule I had been for the day. And then toward the end of the day, I built in a character counts time. At this point, I was not writing any stories myself that were original. I was simply finding stories. For the most part, they had to do with some professional athlete that the kids could relate to. Then I brought them in, I'd read those, they'd springboard conversation about the activity we did that day, and then hopefully more broadly into their lives. Snapshot 5. When I started writing my own stories, I still had no intention to write a book necessarily. At this point, I was writing stories I could share in class as devotionals, and I also had an opportunity to post them on the website because I had developed a Dreamweaver website prior to that as part of a sabbatical, and then one part of the website dealt with integration of faith and learning, and I incorporated devotionals into that part. I also contacted Our Daily Bread, and they gave me permission to link to multiple examples that they had, and then I could have a wider sampling that people could benefit from. And I'll just go to what that looks like right away. I use the website in several courses, and students do all kinds of things with information, but now you're looking at the top right, faith and learning. If you select devotionals, that gives you the choice of generic or sport. And if you go to the generic, there are about 20 examples. Some of them are holiday related, but not necessarily. But none of these are sport related in particular. If you choose the sport ones, I used to have about 30 represented, but now that I've written a book, they're appearing there instead, but I have a sampling of 3 of them. One that addresses high school, one college, and then one Olympic, just as examples, and then they have more information where they can go get others. All right, snapshot 6, and the most recent project. In addition to sharing examples of life lessons and trying to pass the baton to my own kids, and then certainly the Bethel students here, hopefully over times as they go out and they're leaders with other people. I thought, well, why could I not reach a larger audience and compile a large number of sports stories for those who relate to that kind of venue? So I set about doing that. Initially, I had in mind 52, a nice round number, and you think about one per week. Why did I consider them to be supplemental? I had no intention of writing 365. And I thought, for people who are already engaged communing with God, sometimes what they're looking for is a supplemental thing they can do. So if they're involved in sport, they can at least on some kind of intermittent basis be able to introduce sport-related topics. Excuse me. So I started with the thought of 52. That expanded to 60 and then eventually 70, just because I ran into stories I thought had to be told. And then 70 obviously didn't exhaust it, but I thought I had to draw the line someplace. So I landed at 70. Each story highlights a different biblical passage, a variety of different contexts are addressed. So I mentioned before, some are high school related, some are college, some are professional sport related, Olympic sport. And then there are even a handful of ones, thanks to the boys, that had to do with their experience, or even an experience that I had personally. At the end of the book, I have a chapter that summarizes biblical principles of competition, again, particularly for people in a leadership role working with kids in some kind of venue. I thought it might be helpful to be able to summarize a lot of the principles that were dealt with along the way in the various stories and have those all available in one place. So I came up with that at the end of the book. We relate to sports similarly that, how the disciples might have farming or fishing. In their case, obviously, it just described their livelihoods. In our case, it has more to do with our source of pleasure or recreation. Readers could engage with the ideas in 3 different ways. So naturally, they're reading the story, but beyond that, I provide a scripture that relates to each one, and then they can read that along with the wider passage perhaps. Second way is by questions that I provide. So following each story, I have 3 or 4 questions. And again, the solo reader who's doing that as a private devotion can engage in the ideas that way, or if it's a leader with a bigger group, then that can spur conversation among group members. And then thirdly, I provide a short prayer so that someone can be thinking about, well, what's my personal application of this? And it certainly isn't intended as a rigid guideline, but I want them to have a starting point so that they can be praying about how they might mature in a particular way. All right, with respect to that last chapter, I mentioned that there are biblical principles that are included, and I can't obviously address them all right now, but I think 3 ideas capture a different mindset that, at least in my mind, the Christian athlete needs to have, and that's a different view of the opponent, a different view of goals, and a different view of success. So I'll just address each of those briefly. With respect to a different view of the opponent, the world tends to see a contest through a military metaphor. The game is fight or battle, teams have various weapons, the team with balls on the attack, and the opponent is considered the enemy. I'm the first to say, because I really like metaphors and I incorporate them in class. So metaphors can be instructive, they can be helpful to compare one context to another. But I think when you carry the military metaphor too far, it doesn't take very far before it gets out of line and then people have incorrect thoughts that enter into their minds. In this case, one case in point, we had a local all-state athlete who went to a Big Ten university, was told by that series of coaches you had to hate the enemy. By the time he transferred to a different school a couple of years later, he had to seek psychological help to wean ideas out of his mind and kind of get things set back on the straight and narrow and have much more healthy thoughts. So, I don't see any reason whatsoever somebody needs to be told you have to have animosity towards somebody, or you need to consider the opponent the enemy, or certainly not that you need to hate anybody. So there is an alternative, partnership metaphor. And if I recognize that my opponent is made in God's image, is purchased by God, and potentially anointed by God, then I'm much more apt to respect and edify him or her. Opponents can view each other as facilitators trying to bring out the very best. And it's actually much more in keeping with the definition of competition. The root word comes from patare, a Latin word which means to strive. Com is a prefix that means with. So the literal definition is to strive with somebody. Our society tends to put a lot of emphasis on what we do against somebody. And I get that. I compete too. So with respect to the ultimate and end goal of a contest, yes, you are doing something against somebody, because you can't have two people end up on top. So I get that. The problem is an awful lot happens from point A to point B en route to that eventual goal. And a partnership model is a much better and I think more accurate description of what's happening along the way than a military metaphor is. It brings up different goals. In the military metaphor, it tends to be one goal, and that is to win. Rematches are a quest for revenge. I don't know if you follow NBA basketball, but the last 3 years now running, the Golden State Warriors play the Cleveland Cavaliers. The newspaper headline, the second year, which was the first rematch, said, "Can LeBron achieve revenge against the Cleveland Cavaliers?" Again, a lot of people think, well, what's the problem? That's an innocent comment or whatever. But it's the mindset that's carried out to a certain degree that is the problem. The main purpose in athletics or playing a musical instrument or working or anything else we're doing is to glorify God, apply the time, talents, and treasures that we've been given, we're stewards, and to try to maximize those and represent God as well as we possibly can to other people. And it's not that I don't try to win, but it's very much an aside compared to the other things that are happening along the way. The Apostle Paul obviously talks about a race metaphor, and yes, he talks about winning, trying to win the race, but you have to think about what the context of that metaphor is. The metaphor is talking about the race of life, and the race of life is not an exclusive club. Everybody has a chance to finish the course. And one of those two passages, in fact, highlights that's what it's about, is finishing the course. It's not about what you do against somebody. In fact, if you think about how people in the race of life relate to one another, we're trying to support each other. We're trying to undergird each other. It's an interdependent relationship. The opposite of trying to do something against somebody else or trying to undermine them. That doesn't mean I'm not a fierce competitor. It doesn't mean I don't try to win. The boys will tell me I'm a fierce competitor. At age 62, I play hockey once a week. If I can't reach the puck standing up, then I'm down on the ice, diving, trying to reach the puck. But my motivation has little to do with what the outcome of the contest is going to be. I'm trying to maximize what I can do as a player and get the most out of my body, and maybe just a little bit. I don't accept that I'm 62 and I'm trying to behave maybe more young than I am, but in any case, it's not about what's happening at the end of the contest. If people have a different view of their opponent, and if they have a different view of goals, then I think they necessarily have a different view of how they look at success. In the eyes of someone following a military metaphor, obviously it's only about winning, and that's how it's measured. But there are things that I can do in a contest that are things besides winning, and I can view the things that happen along the way. That doesn't mean that we need to tell everybody that they're winners. The phrase sometimes goes, well, if you had fun, you won. No, that's not the message. Everybody can't win in an athletic contest, so it's not about the fact that everybody can win. In a race of life, yes, everybody can finish the course. In an actual athletic contest, no, everybody can't win. The message is, regardless of winning or losing, you can be successful because you can set your eyes on other things. At least one of the ways you do that is to focus on what I call a process-oriented goal. When I coached our 3 boys, it was a heavy emphasis. Still, when I work with adults here as students and they're going out to represent Bethel and represent the Lord to other people, it's about what you do along the way. So if you take the all-American sport like baseball, if I'm up to bat, what's the process goal? It's those things that I have control over. Now, granted, this occurs on a continuum, but there are things that I have more control over relative to the things I don't have control over. So I have control over what pitches I swing at. And if you even think about a major league ball player at the highest level, they go to the Hall of Fame with a 300 batting average. That's still getting on base one less than a third of the time. The biggest single factor that helps them succeed is they swing at strikes and they don't swing at balls. And they get to decide that. Nobody else is making that choice. For the most part, they have control over making contact on the ball. That's why you often see a batter who's fouling away 8 or 9 pitches in a row because they're waiting for a different pitch. They have a lot of control over making contact on the ball. They don't have so much control over where the ball goes or the exact outcome of a fielder fielding the ball. In fact, if you often hear a major leaguer in an interview, they will admit, I wasn't trying to hit a home run. I was trying to hit the ball hard. And yet that is often the result because they're focusing on the process. Take soccer as an example. Craig came away from a U.S. soccer game saying, that was the favorite game I ever played. He did not score a goal. His team did not win the game. What they did do was move the ball up and down both directions of the field like surgeons, setting up many, many scoring opportunities, but the ball happened to go on the net one fewer times than the other team. They can still walk away saying that they're successful. And say a few things about the publishing process. Some of you may be writers right now, or you aspire to be, and it certainly was helpful for me to tap into other people's experience and kind of learn from what happened to them. So I sought out potential publishers in the Christian writers market. This happened in 2004. Just bought it off of Amazon cheap, 2014 edition. And it gives you just a myriad of possible places you could publish things and what the intended audience is for each one. Sent 2 publishers. The first 12 examples was turned down by both. Not uncommon. You might be turned down several times. Added an introduction to the book, and then I tried 2 more publishers. I'll just call them number 3 and 4. Number 3 said no. Number 4 said, hey, we're really interested, but we have to see the whole thing. So when I had 30 stories ready to go, and I had also written the end matter on Principles of Competition, I would get antsy. So I didn't take them literally. I was being proactive. I sent it back to number 4 again. They still said they need to see the entire work. So then I worked toward at that time again, a goal of 52 stories. Sent the entire book back to number 4, and then also a 5th publisher who I had not had contact with prior to that. One of the things that Dan Taylor helped me understand was you can send a work to multiple places at the same time. It's just nice to be courteous and let them know that that's what you're doing. At that point, number 4 said no. Much to my surprise, they were with me all the way up until then. But publisher 5 said yes. So I had a publisher on board. Then I requested funds via the alumni faculty grant. Well, why did I do that if I had a publisher? When I published the first book, I went through a mainline publisher. But by the time I got several years out, of course, they had control over everything. The cost of the book had more than doubled, and I just thought, this is ridiculous. Students don't want to pay that kind of price. And then I self-published the next 2 books. And so I had complete control over that. The price could stay consistent for all time. And very happy with the process. So I really didn't know which way I was going to go. So I applied for funding through alumni faculty grant, and they were gracious enough to award me some money for production costs, which was huge. And I met with the self-publisher, the same one who had worked with my prior 2 books, so I knew exactly what I could expect through them. I had a brief conversation again with Dan Taylor. It wasn't like I was wanting him to tell me what to do, but let's face it, he had a lot of life experience and a lot of writing behind it. And what he could really help me see was what I could realistically expect from a publisher, what they likely would and would not do. And then after having done that, I actually said no to the mainline publisher and decided the main reason, when I say I didn't care for their arrangements, the main reason, they wanted me to buy several hundred books up front. And I just thought, if I'm doing that anyway, then I may as well self-publish. So I went that route. That's a little bit in terms of my journey, taking a look at passing the baton or a legacy to my own kids, then Bethel students, then hopefully the book does well in a much larger audience with respect to sports, something I particularly relate to, and then integrating biblical ideas to that. A lot of people point to Deuteronomy 6 as kind of our context for passing on a legacy. And of course, the whole point of that is that we're always to be about the idea of passing on legacy throughout the normal course of a day. And I get that. But my perhaps admonition, if you want to call that, or my challenge to you, is to, like I did after I heard Dave Simmons talk and after looked at Dan Taylor's book and saw particular strategies people had, then I thought it behooved me to come up with what's a concrete strategy I can use along with the day-to-day things that happen, so I can, in a real concrete and productive way, be about doing that. So, my question for you is, might you have some particular strategy you can do also, and then to take a step toward that? I want to be sure to thank some really key people. I can't very well thank everybody, but 3 different people helped me with editing along the way, which was very significant. 3 different people wrote blurbs for the back of the book, and I used them online in different venues to help promote the book. Erlene Warner, sitting right back here from our own library, helped me with the book layout and formatting in significant ways. Really, some of the things took a completely different look after meeting with her. Graphic design is the self-publisher that I utilized for the last books, and then again for this one. They worked with the cover layout and the eventual printing. The photograph for the cover, I had to go out and buy myself and then give it to them, but they did everything with respect to the layout. And I'd strongly recommend them. They're right out of Hastings if you're looking to do the self-publishing. I want to certainly acknowledge my wife, and 2 of my sons are here. My wife Vicky's here, and then Trent is here along with Craig. But really they were very helpful and encouraging along the way with ideas, and even the manner of choosing the cover was a family decision. Fortunately, when I took the poll, everybody landed on the same one, which was kind of nice. We didn't have to have a drop-down slugfest or anything to decide, so it was easy. And then both the people of the alumni faculty grant, again, very, very helpful. I would have been in a very different place if I was incurring all of the costs of production, because it's an expensive process. And I've also talked to people on other campuses with respect to things like faculty development, alumni faculty grant. And I'm aware that everybody doesn't have the situation we do here. I've been here over 30 years, and we've had a very consistent flow of experiences that people can do to broaden themselves professionally, go different places and travel. And so I'm just very appreciative of that, and again, don't take that lightly. Thank you all for coming. Would have been pretty miserable talking to an empty audience. But I really appreciate you for taking the time and showing interest. When you do go, if you didn't see it on the way out, there is a book table. So if you think you're interested in the book, I'll actually take your money. I'm glad to do that. There are also some flyers next to the book. It might be that you know a couple people who you think would be interested in the content. You can take a couple flyers. There's also a link on that flyer, so you can go online and seek out more information. Students, if you didn't hear at the beginning, if you're my student, you should also be signing in on a clipboard. So I can give you credit in class for doing that. But didn't hear any questions along the way. Maybe it's because I rambled too much, but what kind of question might somebody have that we can elaborate on right now?
What was the most challenging part about...
You have to kind of shout. You know my hearing, and we're in a big space here.
What was the most challenging part about publishing the book?
The most challenging part? Good question. Golly, there were several. The length of time is a big thing, because you make a certain amount of progress. But when you think about writing, again, initially it was 52. It seems like, boy, that's a long way in the future. So remaining steadfast and staying on course was challenging. at least a second very challenging thing was because of what I was trying to do and incorporate biblical ideas, it was very important to me that each one incorporate a different idea. And we can all think of multiple ideas or multiple stories that talk about perseverance or multiple stories that talk about self-control. It's much more difficult to take 70 stories and then say each one's going to come at it in a different way. And so that was very much a challenge. Yes, please.
You referenced the period of time. How much?
Good. Actually, I get asked that a lot. The period of time I've covered. It's a harder one to answer because some of the stories go back a long ways. For instance, some of the stories with the boys, if I lifted one from their childhood and then applied that, could have happened 15 years ago. But for the most part, I'd say about a 2-year window. I also didn't say, also thanks to the administration, I actually ended up with the equivalent of a course release when I did the biggest bulk of the writing over a 6-month period. It wasn't that it was planned, but it turned out that my load was low 1 year and especially high the next year. And they actually were creative in taking the equivalent of a course of the heavy year coming up and applying it to the low year so that I had the equivalent of a course off during the term when I did a lot of the writing. And that was very, very helpful. But about a 2-year period. Yeah.
I love that idea of the striving with as opposed to striving against.
And again, it's not my idea. The definition is there, and there are other writers.
That is the definition, and I just wondered, and I apologize, I don't know what all is in your book, but it reminded me immediately of the story of Jacob struggling with the angel, or
Sure.
struggling with God, in the Old Testament, and then getting renamed afterwards as Israel, which literally means he struggles with God, right? And that story always baffled me because I thought, how is that a good thing? It was like a badge of honor, to now be named he struggles with God. Did you think at all about that story?
I didn't.
Did you work with it? Okay.
I did not. I'll probably remember it if I do a second edition.
Yeah, by all means.
But no, it did
More
not
writing.
dawn on me.
Okay.
Anyone else? Again, I appreciate you being here very much. Feel free to take a look at materials, and if you just want to talk to me separately, I'm not in any hurry, so I'm glad to do that as well.